Welcome to Huddle Up with Matias Bueno. Today's guest is no stranger to Canadian football. He has a resume with a laundry list of items that speak for itself, including being a Grey Cup champion in 1989, a three-time CFL All-Star, was alongside Chris Cuthbert when they won the Gemini Award for Best Play-by-Play Analyst in 2006, won the Canadian Screen Award for his work in the 100th Grey Cup in 2014, and is currently a CFL on TSN play-by-play or color commentator and analyst. Please welcome Glen Suitor. Glen, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode.
Matthias, how are you? I'm happy to be here and always happy to talk about Canadian football.
I'm doing very excellent, and it's a great, exciting time right now in Canadian football. The draft is upon us in under 2 weeks' time, and when you reflect back on your playing days at the Simon Fraser University, back before they had fancy combines and drills and all those sorts of things, it's a great, exciting time for young players in Canadian football.
Yeah, for Canadian athletes, and I would add world-class athletes, because I don't think we say that enough, because the guys that end up making pro football rosters, the Canadians that grew up right beside you and your neighbors, those are world-class athletes that are, that are training and working as hard as any athlete down south to be prepared and ready for these combines. And it is an exciting time. I remember when I got the call, it was from actually the Edmonton Eskimos just prior to the draft saying, hey, if we draft you, would you be happy being an Edmonton Eskimo? Of course, now they're the Edmonton Elks, but I just wanted to play. Give me an opportunity any way you possibly can, and I'm in. And then the next morning, I didn't hear my name called in the first round. And then the first pick of the second round, Saskatchewan took me, and immediately thought about Ron Lancaster and George Reed and the great tradition in, Rider Nation. And it was a very exciting time. But again, these are world-class athletes that are getting a chance to play pro in their backyard.
And this year's combine was no exception, riddled with talents. There was the year off and the first time in person. Seeing them camaraderie up close amongst the players was truly special, because you know how much it meant to them, especially for the global players, finally being able to come down and show their talent from all across the world. There was many talents from sea to sea, and it was truly one of the best combines, I think, that people had witnessed in a long time, not necessarily because of the skill level of players, but because of the fact that it had been so long since they'd all been together in person, showing the league their talent.
Yeah, I think we all have a different perspective, don't we? I mean, we all have that, what would it feel like if we lost it? And, I think there's a lot of people with different jobs in different parts of the world that have gone through real tough times and are still going through tough times that, this is still sports, but it's what do you feel like if it's gone? And when we lost the season in 2020, I think we all had that perspective of, we can make tweaks and we can talk about our game and how many people want to try and fix something that I don't think is broken, to be honest with you. And the talent gets better every single year. The Canadian talent gets better every year. There are more and more kids all the time going and playing in the NCAA, and they didn't not play in the NCAA 10 years ago because they weren't good enough. They didn't because the NCAA wasn't looking back then. Now they're looking, and now they're noticing that Canadian athletes, although the numbers are smaller than the US, Canadian athletes are as good as any you'll find in the world, and they're getting a chance to play in a lot of different stages. And when they get a chance to be drafted, then they come in, they show their skills and talents right here in their backyard if they make it in the Canadian Football League. But I do like the global initiative as well, generally speaking. I think sometimes we have maybe swung the pendulum a little too far to be mandating spots just yet until we know that the skill level can get there. But I do love the inclusion of it. And I do love that we are sort of, spreading our wings internationally, if you want to say it that way, as a league, and that they are, in Europe or Mexico, looking at Canadian Football League logos. You got to start somewhere.
100%. And when you mention the point about the NCAA, you look at guys like Javon Holland and Chase Claypool, who are making a serious impact as starters in the NFL, something that Canadian football hasn't seen I don't really think ever there's been Canadians who've played in the NFL, but seeing their success at the college and professional level representing Canada is truly remarkable.
Yeah, and again, I think that it's more that the NFL, the NCAA, Division two or three football down south are looking now more than they ever have. They're considering the Canadian athlete more than they ever have, and part of that was, back years ago, there were times when NFL scouts, wouldn't look at black quarterbacks, African American quarterbacks. They wouldn't even consider them. They would try to play them in a different position. The Canadian Football League started doing it, allowing guys like Warren Moon to play quarterback where they played in college. And so we were leaders and front runners. I say we, the league was leaders and front runners in that regard. And it's the same with the talent that has really always been there, and the CFL has been developing. But the NFL now, their scouts are not, their egos have sort of come in check to a point of saying, hey, there's some good athletes all around the world, including right to our north, and let's take a look at Canadian athletes. And that's what they're doing now more and more, and they're giving them a real opportunity now. They go to camp, they're not just camp dummies. They're actually going to actually work out. The scouts take a look at them, the coaches take a look, and they get a chance. So Chase Claypool is a great example. I mean, if Chase was playing in the CFL, would he do anything any different than he's doing now? Absolutely not. He'd be the same guy, the same training, the same person, same character, and he'd be paid less because of the economics of it, but his actual skill and talent would translate either way. And I think so many athletes are like that on both sides of the border.
And when you look back at maybe some of the times that you spent playing for Saskatchewan, one team through your entire career, 11 seasons, you had a chance to compete for the Grey Cup, win one in 1989. And in the 89 Grey Cup, it was considered, or still to this day is considered, one of the greatest Grey Cups in CFL history, an exciting back and forth affair. But the pretense to that game was interesting because neither team had been predicted to be in the big game in November. And the Riders, your team was only 9-9 and ended the season actually on a loss to Edmonton on the road before you guys went on an amazing 3-game run of the playoffs, including a Grey Cup victory. Talk a bit about the team in 1989, what characters, how they were comprised, and what made them so special to be able to go on that run, considering they weren't seen as a mighty powerhouse. You guys were only at 500.
Yeah, we were a 9-9 team, and I think all the things that are the benefits of playing team sports in general, but definitely football, which is the team sport of all time, because there are so many different athletes, different backgrounds, different upkeep, different upbringings, different skin color, different religious or political beliefs, and you put everybody in that locker room, and then you have to figure out how to not dismiss or get rid of your personal beliefs, but to shelve them while you're in that room and make sure you're all together with one common goal, which is to win the game in front of you. And I think that example can translate into real life for a lot of people. Just watching, even, you don't even have to be part of it. You can see the struggle that a team goes through, and you can say, in my own life, if I can get through that together with my family or my coworkers, we can get through these adverse times and move on to win. And I think that was an example of 89 is what happened. We were a talented team. We had lots of talent, but the reason we won was because we came together through some adversity. We came together as a team when there were mistakes made on the field near the end of the regular season, one of which I was responsible for myself. And the team rallied around each other, and we went on that run. I mean, one of the biggest upsets of all time in Canadian Football League history was the West Final, where Edmonton was 16-2 at the time, and we were playing in Edmonton, packed house, and we had to go in there and try and upset what many called the best team ever assembled in CFL history. That's over 100 years of history. And so we went in there and, beat them pretty soundly. So then we go to Hamilton or into Toronto to play Hamilton. And again, No one really thought those two teams would be there, but the Grey Cup that year showcased what is great about Canadian football, which is that final 3 minutes. The final 3 minutes in the CFL is the best 3 minutes in any sport anywhere in the world. You can't end a game like you can in the CFL. You can score 3 or 4 times in the final 3 minutes. No other sport really, not even basketball anymore because of all the timeouts that are called in the final minute and a half, 2 minutes. But you can score so many different ways in the CFL. In that last 3 minutes, so dramatic when both teams are moving the ball the way we did on that day. And there were 83 points scored in a championship game, including the best catch ever made by Tony Champion, on either side of the border. There were 83 points scored, and never has a Super Bowl ever had a total of 83 points scored. But and it's not to compare, and it's not to disparage any other league. I'm just pointing out the fact that our rules, and I know there's always debate about our rules, but our rules provide the opportunity for a game like that, because you can score so many different ways, a lot of different kick return scores possible. And with the timing and the clock, and especially that final 3 minutes, well, you can put a lot of points on the board, upwards of almost 100 points in a championship game. And I, again, it doesn't happen every week, and there are dud games in every league, but that was an indication, I think, and a real showcase of what our game can be.
You mentioned the Tony Champion catch, and if the listener may not be familiar, Tony Champion playing on broken ribs with an acrobatic catch for the ages. Yeah. Harry Skipper draped all over him, falling backwards, season on the line, 3rd and 8, under a minute left, and makes one of the most unbelievable plays that you'll ever see. Did you exchange words with Harry on the sideline after that play, or what was your reaction in the moment? I mean, maybe you didn't see it happen live, but the aftermath and the first few minutes after Tony Champion made the catch to tie the game.
Yeah, I did see it live. I had the best seat in the house. In fact, I was about 5 yards away from him when I watched it. And, honestly, even though you're right in the heat of the battle there as a player, when I saw him flat out lean back the way he did and dive basically backwards, catching it well over his head, my immediate thought was, oh my goodness, what a catch. I mean, I became a fan for a split second, and then immediately clicked back into, okay, it's a tie game. What time is left? Can we block this extra point? It was, the next thing was, what can we do to still win this game? But when I saw it initially, I thought, wow. Now, his ribs were an interesting story, because earlier in the game, I helped him out with that rib injury a little bit. He made a catch down the sideline, and although he was borderline already down by contact, I gave him another shot with my shoulder pad as he was lying on the ground, just kind of dove in there, and I could hear the wind come out of him. That was, can't remember, it was in the 3rd quarter or early 4th, and I could hear the wind come out of him. And at that point, I could just hear him try and gasp for air. Now, I didn't know his ribs were cracked, but I was just giving Tony Champion another shot to maybe slow him down a little bit. In the huddle before that big catch to tie the game, I talked to Richie Hall, and we were going to double team Tony Champion. We were thinking about, should we double team him? Should I go from the safety spot all the way over there and double with Harry Skipper? It's harder with the wide out, but you can still pull it off. And we decided to double team Rocky DiPietro. We thought it'd be a closer throw. Maybe Kerrigan would lean on his big sort of tight end type slot back in Rocky DiPietro. So we double teamed him. And as soon as this ball was snapped, it was pretty quick that he was going to throw the fade. I just got on my horse to get over there, and I was 6 yards away when he made the best catch with that on the line and at stake, the best catch I've ever seen either side of the border. No question.
And people will talk about great catches. They talk about Dwight Clark's, they call it the catch, or people talk about Odell Beckham Jr., but you have to think about the stakes. Dwight Clark's catch was just essentially straight up and down. Mind you, the stakes were very high. But Tony Champion, that's like people think about, I can't remember what the name of the nickname for the game is, but when the Dolphins played the Chargers and Kellen Winslow made how many catches, blocked the game winning field goal with basically like 10 plus injuries all at the same time. People consider that one of the greatest performances ever. And that wasn't in a Super Bowl or in a championship game, even. And even when looking at the history of Tony Champion, I didn't even realize that he was so consistent with his ability to catch the football in terms of yards per catch, but his season metrics were very sporadic. He would have one great season and then lower numbers. And then he led the CFL in 1989 and then could not get up to that same measure. And mind you, there was talk of people saying that he felt upset with his usage, etc. And whatever the result may be, he was still a phenomenal player and really displayed how good he was, especially in that championship game. And in the pregame on CFL and CBC, talking about Tony Champion could break out the game. And that was a great foreshadow show for what was to come with his performance.
It really was. And, I haven't really looked at his season by season numbers, but I do know playing against him, his ability to adjust to a throw physically without losing any speed, just know where and when to be there, I think is often overlooked. But just anywhere in his area code, he would come down with the ball. I mean, again, that catch, keep in mind, that catch was with 47 seconds to go in the game. It was 3rd down and 8 outside of the 10-yard line. And they throw a fade and he makes that catch. Ken Austin then runs 4 different plays, getting the clock down to about 10 seconds. Ridgway kicks a field goal. Then we have to kick off. They kick back to us. Again, all of that happens because of the rules in Canadian football. And that drama, I don't think you can, you could write a script and not duplicate it as well. But Champion was as good as they got. He really was. There's a few guys that really are at the next level. Think of Alan Pitts, and there's a lot, but Tony Champion, anywhere in his area code, he would come down with it.
Now, the following series, like you mentioned, Ken Austin had to drive you guys down into range with under 47 seconds left. And you, even though you played defense, were the holder for Dave Ridgway on that field goal. And you could hear on the broadcast Don Whitman and making the call and the analyst questioning, are you guys going to go kick a field goal right now? Or are you going to try to make, run the football or get more chunk yardage? Austin throws the out, you get more chunk yardage. And then one of the biggest plays in the history of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And the word on the street is that you had tried to have as much of a calm conversation with Dave before the kick during the timeout. What was that? What was the setting like, setting up for the potential game-winning field goal? And how did you handle it with Dave, knowing the pressure was on not only one team, but an entire province's 23-year drought?
Yeah, when I think back about it, I get nervous all over again. And it was a long time ago, believe me. But yeah, Dave and I had a really unique relationship. First of all, we spent 10,000 hours together. Bob Poley, our center, me holding the ball and Ridgway kicking it. You spend 10,000 hours with these guys because you're out there practicing before and after every single game, every single practice, like thousands and thousands of reps. So, I often would put pressure on Dave in practice by saying, okay, I'll pick the spot, I'll pick the hash mark. We're going to just go to it within 20 seconds. We have to kick it. You have to make it. Dinner's on the line. And I thought, just by doing that for fun during the week, at times we would create pressure that you never can duplicate it. Certainly not a championship on the line, 10 seconds to go. You got to make it or we would have been still tied at the time, but that pressure you can't really duplicate, but I tried. And so whenever we'd room together as well. So whenever we'd get into those moments, and there were lots of them, game-winning kicks, I would just talk about other things. I would take his mind off the moment for a second, just, whether it be something that we did together, some restaurant that we went to, a joke, it wasn't to distract him. It was just to say, hey, we do this automatically. Let's not make it bigger than it is. I'll hold it, put it down, you kick it. But that's the funny story too. And I've edited some of it. But part of the story on that particular kick was that Bob Poley came back and we were talking, Dave and there was a timeout called and we were talking in the timeout, and then Hamilton called a timeout. So then I went to the sideline to talk to John Gregory. He wanted to snap down, which means the O-line on a count from me would snap up and then drop back down to try and draw the defense or the field goal return team offside. I didn't like the idea when I was running over. I knew what he wanted and I didn't want to do it. So we had that discussion. I said, Coach, what if we go offside? Now Dave's 5 yards further away and it puts more pressure on my guy. And he's going to make this. Let's just kick it and end this thing. And John said, fine. We went back out. But Poley looked in the huddle and he goes, when it, Suitor, he was looking at me. He goes, Suitor, when it leaves my hand, it's your problem. I just thought a little bit of a smile there. And then we went about it as automatic as we've ever done it in practice. And that's why you practice. That's why you do all that work, because in the moment like that, with that kind of pressure, you want your body to take over and get your mind right out of it and just do it automatically.
And I remember back in my days of playing football and when talking with my holder before kicking big field goals, you like to have those kinds of calming moments, because when you're loose, you're at your best. When you're tight and you're nervous and you're building up the story in your head, that's when things can go awry.
Yeah, I get nervous now watching it back. I get actually sort of a butterfly thinking, what if I dropped it? Now, you take that and you magnify it in the moment with the crowd going nuts, and you think about, what if I miss? You're in big trouble mentally. You probably will. And many sports psychologists will tell you that your mind will take you exactly where you want it to. So if you say to yourself, what if I miss? It's going to enter that thought into your mind and you just might. So keep it out, block it out, say, what if I make it? I'm going to make it. End of story.
And the aftermath, I mean, you guys still had to kick off, of course, and maybe made it a slight bit anticlimactic as it wasn't a game-winning field goal right at the buzzer. But the team had ended the drought of 23 years, and it was the second Grey Cup in team history. As someone who's originally from BC, but you played your whole career in Saskatchewan and were a part of such an iconic Grey Cup championship for them, what did it mean for you as a player, and what did it mean for the entire province at the time as you remember it?
Well, as a player, I've not been able to put words to the feeling of it, because again, so many hours, so many times as an athlete, and athletes at all levels certainly can relate to this. But when you put in the time, when you have all that self-doubt, every different level you get to, peewee to bantam to moving on, whatever it may be, high school to university, you have self-doubt, and athletes don't like to talk about it because they're confident guys. But it's true to everybody. You're not sure if you're good enough, and you have to have these milestones, and you have to work like nobody else. You have to outwork everybody around you, even though technically you might not be, but in your mind, you have to think you are, and keep pushing that envelope, pushing that elastic. So when all of that builds up and you get to those moments, it's hard to put to words the feeling. And then all the people around you, your wife, your family, that go through every bit of that roller coaster ride with you, it's hard to put to words what that means. But I can say that I think as a group collectively, I don't want to talk for my other teammates that year, but I feel like collectively we all felt like I felt, which was, it's been so long for this fan base, and this fan base has been so great, so passionate. This is for them. And I kept thinking that, that first week when we came back, half of Taylor Field was full. It was 20 below. It was at night, and we brought the cup in after flying back from Toronto. And I was amazed that many fans were out that cold at night, half the stadium full. And I just kept thinking, this is for them. The whole province went crazy. All the Rider fans that are living in different cities across Canada and around the world, they went crazy, had their own parties in Mexico and everywhere else that they were at the time. And it was a long time coming. They deserved it. And it was great to sort of feel like we were handing the cup and all of that great history and Ron Lancaster and George Reed paving the way in the first one. And for us to have that second one and hand it to the fans, that was special.
And you talk about paving the way, keeping the tradition going. Ken Austin, a teammate of yours who eventually became a head coach of the Saskatchewan Roughriders, continued that tradition forward. And again, only 4 Grey Cup titles, but take your pick as to which one is the most iconic. They all have so much significance. And to see, as someone from Winnipeg, growing up as a kid, everyone was very upset when the Bombers lost the Grey Cup to the Riders and thought that we would never live it down for the rest of the time. But on the flip side, when you observe as a fan of the league, you see how the history connects. And when you know how much it meant for Ken Austin to, A, as a quarterback, bring a championship to Saskatchewan, and then B, as a coach, to end another drought for Saskatchewan, I don't know if it gets any better. And I'm not sure if you were super close with him at the time or not so much, but he must have just, I couldn't even imagine what the feeling was like for him, especially considering he was a part of 2 drought-ending championships.
Yeah, he was a special guy too. I mean, we don't win it in '89 without Ken Austin. And both of our quarterbacks, he and Tom Burgess, were crucial. And in fact, Tom played basically the entire West Final against Edmonton. But we don't win it without Kent, because Kent, it was, basically the coordinator, or let's put it this way, he was heavy-handed in the play calling and the play design, but had that attitude and that, not arrogance, but confidence, and was right on the edge, that we always believed we were in every game. I mean, even that season, we were only 9-9, as you mentioned off the top, and we felt like we could beat Edmonton. We beat them in the preseason, and we beat them once in the regular season as well. We were one of their 2 losses all year. So we went into that West Final thinking we can beat this team. And the way Kent carried himself, whether the score was we were behind or ahead, we always felt like as a team that we could win with him. And when I talk about quarterbacks now as an analyst, I look for that, and I ask teammates that, does this guy inspire you? So when he was in '07 and they won, he at that time implemented that same philosophy with Kerry Joseph, who was the MOP of the year that year. And Kerry Joseph, who was a very good quarterback, you probably wouldn't put him in your top 10 if you were rating them, but he got the most out of him because he implied that same technique and that same leadership ability. And then Darian Durant was 13. And again, another just magical year with Tom Hanks and Martin Short in attendance and a packed house to win at home in 13. That was special in its own way as well. And calling that game was a lot of fun. I'm sure not for Hamilton fans and not for the Hamilton Tiger Cats, but a lot of fun to do it at home when the home team is doing well. And that could have been, in any park. But those championship moments are about leadership, and Ken Austin was certainly our leader. And we always believed that we could win with him at the helm.
So of the 4 Saskatchewan Roughrider Grey Cup championships, which one would you make the argument for being the most iconic?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know that there's one that's more important than another. I think that first one in 1966 was over, there were over 50 years of CFL football when they won that first one. And I would say that would be sort of bigger than all of them to get on the board. And by the way, the very next year was the very first Super Bowl, and in '67, and we had 50 plus Grey Cups by then, and Saskatchewan won in '66 with Ron Lancaster and George Reed, who are now statues in front of and George is still with us, but the late Ron is remembered with a statue in front of Mosaic. So I don't know that I'd rank one more important than another, one more iconic, but I would say that first one is got to be special in its own way. Ours was so exciting and back and forth, not necessarily great for defensive players like myself, but when you score 83 points, but they all are great, just like back-to-back wins for your Bombers, because it doesn't matter when or where you win a championship with a group of people. That is a moment that you will forever struggle at describing verbally.
Absolutely. And I was even talking amongst some of my friends, and we were trying to pinpoint, well, what would you tout as the best Grey Cup for the Bombers? And people will always point to the back-to-back in 61, 62 and the Fog Bowl and the overtime, the first overtime Grey Cup ever, Kenny Payne scrambling and scoring the game-winning touchdown. But then you have to think about the repetition of history with 2019 and 2021, dominant defensive performances, the rally back against Hamilton this last year. It's you're right. It is very difficult, and it's all a matter of subjective opinion amongst fans. But it's great to see how sometimes history can repeat itself. And even though there's only 8 or 9 teams in the CFL, there's so much history, and the storylines are absolutely off the charts when you start to analyze the history of Grey Cup championships, or even when you start to ask the question for all CFL teams. You look at BC winning a Grey Cup, not at home, not once, but twice. And you're a local BC boy. And I'm sure, toward the last season of your career, maybe it didn't end in glory as a Grey Cup champion, but you knew just how important it was for Louis Pasaglia to split the uprights, to win the battle of North versus South with everything on the line, not just for BC, but the entire league, Canadian football players. What do you remember from the 1994 Grey Cup? I must ask, because as someone who's from BC and grew up a big fan of Canadian football, that one must have been pretty heavy as well.
Yeah, it was real exciting for its own reasons. And a final kick by Louis Pasaglia, one of the great kickers of all time, and a great sort of BC boy. I mean, a guy who went to SFU as I did, and know him real well, and Louis making the kick, really sort of put a star on that win. But I have my personal sort of journey in broadcasting basically started with that game, because I was doing radio while I was playing in Saskatchewan prior to that, and I was ready to go back to Saskatchewan and play probably another 2 or 3 if I could stay healthy, 2, 3, maybe even 4 years. And that's when TSN came knocking, and they knew I had done some radio. So they knew I was from BC and living in BC. So in that 94 Cup, they asked if I could be a guest analyst on the radio broadcast of the Grey Cup, because CBC at that time had the rights. So for the Cup, so we were doing radio at TSN, and they asked me to be a guest with Leif Pedersen and John Wells, and I came on as a guest analyst. And right after that was when I got the call to audition for the color analyst job, because they were going to add a second crew. And so the 94 game, as exciting as it was to be there, I was actually calling it on radio as an analyst, and it opened the door just a sliver for me to get into my second career in broadcasting. So in 1995 was the year I started. I had to make the decision that year to either retire from football and do broadcasting, or turn down the opportunity to broadcast and stay with football for a few more years. And because we had won in 89, it was a tough decision, but because we had won in 89, and I could look at that championship ring and say, that's why you play. You play to become a champion with a group of people around, and you do it together and get that feeling. And I had that feeling. So that was the determining factor to move into broadcasting. So 94 it was a significant championship, both personally and for the Canadian Football League.
I remember when I interviewed Dustin Nielsen on my show, and I was talking with him actually about that game, because I was asking him if he'd ever felt that the comparison of him being the Canadian Gus Johnson was appropriate, as he's a very animated and enthusiastic play-by-play commentator. And I'd said to him, and maybe you knew this or maybe you didn't, but that game was broadcast not only on CBC, but on ESPN because of the American teams being in the league at the time.
Right.
Do you know who the broadcast duo was for the 1994 Grey Cup on ESPN?
I don't know.
Color was Mike Mayock, and play-by-play was Gus Johnson.
Oh, nice. I didn't even know that. Actually, didn't know that. That's news to me, but very interesting.
I remember when I was during the beginning of COVID, I was trying to study the history of each team's Grey Cup championships, and I came across the full film of the game on YouTube, and I hear Gus Johnson calling the game like very slow, methodically, and I was like, "Is this really Gus Johnson? Like he's not freaking out and jumping out of the table or anything like that?" But that was almost the very beginning of his career, and it just again that comparison of seeing how the CFL can influence and impact or have a relationship with the NFL. That's one of the off-field connections that I had never really seen before, is someone like Gus Johnson has become one of the best broadcasters in football, especially in the NFL and college, with Mike Mayock, who's again also been very closely involved with the NFL as a GM, as an analyst. And yes, you weren't, maybe people want to keep winning and playing for championships, but I think that's, life after football is also equally as important. And I think you probably feel you made the right choice in choosing broadcasting to continue a second career.
Yeah, it turned out the right way to go, because I've loved being an analyst and loved being this close to the CFL for all these years, and being able to sort of just, add color, add a little information to who the players are that you're watching on a game day. And I will say this too, Dustin is a star. I mean, I was great to work with him all year long. And I just think, man, he's got a very bright future. I look forward to working with him again this year, because, you know why? And his delivery, his enthusiasm, all of that is great. Those are the logistics of the job. Chris Cuthbert, also great. Logistics of the job, nailed it. But the reason they were great was not the logistics. It was because a lot of people have great logistics. It was their passion. It was real and it was true. It wasn't a broadcaster who liked other leagues or other sports that was just dropped in to do a couple of games. Cuthbert, Rod Smith, Rod Black, these guys love Canadian football. They grew up with Canadian football. They will not apologize for it. They are passionate about it. And Dustin is right there with all of them. And he stands up and he shows it. It comes out. People always ask me when people are complimentary, and believe me, it goes both ways. But when people ask me about, how do you do it, or why do you think you're successful at it? And I will say, because I love the game. I absolutely love the game. And I love that we are showcasing Canadians in the game. I mean, we could talk at length about the whys and, kids thinking to themselves, can I make $4 million a year playing for the Pittsburgh Steelers? Well, yeah, maybe. You keep working, maybe you can. But you're the same guy and doing the same things if you make 150 grand in the Canadian Football League. And if you're doing it for money, somewhere along the way, you will probably hit a roadblock that you won't overcome. But if you're doing it because you are passionate, because you love the game, and because you want to be better every single day you get up out of bed, if you're doing it for those reasons, the sky's the limit. Maybe you will make 10 million. And if you don't, you could still play pro football right here in your backyard. And that's why I love it. That's why those guys calling the games, Chris and Dustin, and those guys have been so good, and Dustin will be so good moving forward.
Having worked alongside Chris Cuthbert for a long time, like arguably one of the best, and this is just in my opinion, and not to boost or to gas people up, but growing up as a kid, when I would listen to you and Chris Cuthbert on TSN, like that to me was the voice of the CFL. I didn't necessarily know the faces or the names when I was very young, but I would just hear it and it was familiar. And so that's what I think really shows like the importance of loving the Canadian Football League. You mentioned Rod Smith, you mentioned Rob Black, Dustin Nielsen, all people that grew up with Canadian football, Canadians that love the game. And even another person who was before my time when I was a youngster, but Don Whitman, one of the great
Absolutely.
broadcasters in CFL history. And he was towards the end of his time while you were at the beginning. What can you say about Don Whitman as a broadcaster and as a person in the experiences that you've had working with him?
Yeah, again, the big voice. And when I first started in television, I was able and allowed to do both. So I could work the regular season with TSN, and TSN allowed me to work the playoffs with CBC. So I would work sidelines or, different roles, sometimes a panelist, not necessarily in the booth, but I got a chance to be around those guys. And again, the CBC always did a nice job of the Canadiana angle of Canadian football. Like we'd sit in meetings and the focus was often on the Canadians playing. And sometimes, and quite often, the American is the quarterback, so he's going to be talked about. But there was always an emphasis on Canadians, Canadian talent, the Canadiana of it, the Canadian national anthem. Let's make sure we're on top of that. Let's make sure we capture the emotion, and that's what makes guys like Don Whitman and Chris Cuthbert. That's what has made them so good at their jobs, is that they take the time to understand the nuance, how the league has developed, the history of it, the studying that they do to prepare for a game. Yes, the players on both teams, the coaching staffs, the history that year of the teams that are in the championship. But it goes beyond that. It's how many times has Saskatchewan won? And let me look at all of those different championships, or BC, and depending on who's in the game. And when they find themselves down those rabbit holes, they realize that they were kids just like you, watching, thinking, this is awesome. This is cool. That's why I am on a mission in the next 4 or 5 years. And I'm trying to rally as many allies as I can in our country to just draw a line in the sand with anybody who wants to devalue our game in any way, devalue the Canadian content of it, devalue the rules. Our game is not broken. Our game is exciting. As Mark Trestman said, an American who's coached in both leagues, has said, it is one of the great games in the great final 3 minutes in the history of sport. And it is, in his words, a well-conceived game. And to me, that's important, because it has the rules it has, because that opens the potential for an 89 type of championship. Other sports and other leagues don't have that potential because their rules restrict it. So, yes, we can always tweak, and yes, we should always be listening to different fan opinions. And yes, we should, in rules committee, always go over these things, but this is our game and we need to be proud of it. Proud that our Canadian kids are getting a chance to showcase their skills and ability, made up of world-class athletes. And the difference between the 200th guy drafted in the CFL, or excuse me, in the NFL, and anybody you're watching in the CFL is nothing. It's zero. All those guys played college ball down south that are up here in our league. All our guys played top level U Sports or junior football even, and have prepared themselves for an opportunity. And if they make the team, they're good enough to make the team. There's no free rides. And so I want to be proud of it. I will always be proud of it and never apologize. But that's why those guys are so good, and they have been, when calling CFL games, because for Chris Cuthbert, it was as important to call the Grey Cup as it was to call the gold medal game for Canada. It was at the same level for him. And I try to explain that to people, and some don't want to hear it, but it is true. And if you talk to Chris, he'll say the same thing.
And even just some of the games and the iconic moments that Chris has had in the booth, or any of the broadcasters, yourself included, Rod Smith, Rob Black, for Grey Cup games, it's really hard to sometimes put into words how impactful it is in terms of the fabric of Canadian sports culture. And one of the games that I always point to and fans want to ask me about, well, especially here living in Toronto and going to school and in a sports journalism class of 30 students where I'm the only one that loves the CFL. It sometimes feels like you're carrying a lot of weight on your shoulders amongst people that aren't as well versed in the league. And people will ask me questions about what makes a league great, or what moments can you point to? And I point to the stories of the 91 Argos, or I point to the stories of when chatting with author Paul Woods, talked about the 87 Grey Cup and how crazy that one was, 89. And the one that stuck out for me as a kid that really wrapped up my love for the CFL was 2009. Everything about that game, how back and forth it was, the storylines, the calls, they still give me chills to this day. And people always think about the last few plays, but I think about the entire game. That game really cemented my love for the CFL. And it's all thanks to the players, the storylines, the broadcasters who are working on the sideline, guys in the booth, and just the environment that was created. And that's, I'm sure, a very memorable one for yourself in terms of when you were calling it. Maybe as a person who used to play for Saskatchewan, it's not the best thing that could have happened, but that's why we love the game. We have to play it, and those stories will always live on.
Yeah, that is a great one. And it has nothing to do with me playing in Saskatchewan, because if the game's situation was reversed and it was Montreal that was going through that, I would have felt the exact same way. That was one of the few times in the broadcast booth that I've actually been speechless. Like I was searching, and Chris was outstanding to pick up the ball and run with it. But I had a moment where I wasn't really sure how I wanted to approach that, because when it happened, I had never in my life seen any game, any sporting event where a team celebrates for a minute, half a minute, 45 seconds to a minute, celebrates as champions, and then they get organized and realize, oh no, you didn't win. We have to now set up for another kick. We've all seen the walk-off field goals made or missed. And so that is immediate, and you go, okay, champions, not champions. Got it. Still hard for the team that loses, but at least it's absolute, and then you know it's over. This was different. And so I was looking at it thinking, the shots of the emotion of some of those Rider players wondering what had happened, and just the almost relief from the Montreal bench of, we got another shot, are you kidding me? And to try and figure out how to, so sometimes I think you can back away and just let the pitchers do the talking. But do me a favor when you talk in those classrooms that you've been in or you've with your buddies. I love both leagues and I love football. You put a football game in front of me, I'm watching it. And that's both sides of the border. A lot of exciting NFL games that have happened over the past couple of years. I think they're getting more and more CFL style quarterbacks, which is one of the reasons for the excitement in the NFL over the last few years. But tell your friends, listen, you can tell me what you love about your league or your game or your sport. Don't devalue mine. I'm going to stop you when it comes to devaluing mine. And I think we should do that from the top on down, whether you hear it from someone in the league office, a player, a coach, a referee, anybody that is directly involved with the league. If they devalue it, stop them, because they shouldn't be. And their facts are incorrect, because it is as an exciting as any sport in the world. The last 3 minutes is more exciting than anywhere in the world in any sport. The rules are generated to allow for the opportunity of up to 80 points being scored in a championship. It gives opportunities for Canadian talent in our country. And these are world-class athletes, world-class. Some of them in the offseason will go and compete in the Olympic Games. World-class athletes that you're watching, and it's worth it, and it's in your own backyard. And I guarantee you that all those athletes, American and Canadian, and sometimes global now, will step up and they will go to your kids' school and they will talk to your kids, or they'll go to your kids' flag football practice, because they are part of the community and they want to be. They're one of the most approachable athletes you'll ever meet. So when you're in that group with your buddies and everybody, just say, hey, I love the NFL too, but do not devalue. I'm going to stop you. if you're devaluing our game and you're disparaging our game and our athletes, because I love it. I'm in. And that's what Chris Cuthbert does. And you'd be surprised how many star people, performers, how many star athletes have played down the NFL, they all feel that way too. I try to say that all the time. I mean, the Warren Moons and the Doug Flutys of the world who've played in both leagues, they go, oh, it is such a great game up there. If they could have made the same amount of money playing, they would have stayed in Canada. But you and I both know that, you know, if ESPN offered me $5 million, $10 million a year, what did Romo make? If he offered me $18 million a year to go and call NFL or college games in the States, I would say to TSN, thanks, but I gotta go. But you know, I mean, you don't do anything differently, and I think we can both be patriots and stand tall and still like both leagues.
100%. That's very well said. I couldn't have put it into better words myself, because you see it. When I interviewed Milt Stegall, one of the things he said to me is, if guys got paid the same, they play in the CFL, because they know that they're part of the community. They're not just viewed as $1 million commodities. And there's a real love of the game in the Canadian Football League. You look at, yes, Toronto is probably the most important city for the financial lifeblood of the league. But when it comes to the passion of the league, the two most important places are Saskatchewan and Winnipeg. Saskatchewan fans have endured more suffering and heartache, having the worst winning percentage in Grey Cup history, having the least amount of Grey Cups, but yet they still turn out in droves to games, whether they're 3-15 or whether they're 13-5, Grey Cup champions, or competing for the first pick. Winnipeg, same thing. Bomber fans had to endure the second longest Grey Cup drought in league history.
Yeah.
And they still showed up and they still came out to support. And that says a lot.
And had fun. You know, I mean, that's what I try to tell people sometimes in Toronto when they're struggling there in attendance, or you know, if it's a down year for BC, and BC's had some great years. So if it's a little bit down, I'll say to the fans, you know, you really are the ones who create the atmosphere. I mean, you know, my son went to school down in Nashville, and the Nashville Predators in the hockey world early on were, you know, nothing. Like, they were brand new and no one really cared. And in Nashville, it's a big Southern football state, and so it took a time, but they put a few things in place. But it was really the crowd themselves that decided, you know what, this is fun. It's a 2.5-hour escape, watch my team. And it became one of the great arenas to be in the National Hockey League, created really by their own fans. So I tell fans all the time, you know, you create the atmosphere, and why not go in and spend 3 hours watching your team from Toronto, world-class athletes. Let me give you a quick stat on the numbers, because I don't think people get a real good grasp of how good the quality is in both leagues, because there's really only two professional football leagues in the world, ours and the NFL. And every single year, upwards of 15,000 graduating seniors are coming out of major college programs in the States. So Div 1 and 2 coming out of major college programs, and basically around 15,000, 300 or 400 of those, somewhere in between that, between 300 and 400 get a chance to go to a camp in the NFL or the CFL. So 300 or 400 out of 15,000 graduating senior football players starting in major college programs in the States. That doesn't even count our Canadians in youth sport and junior football up here. It's just in the States. So 3 or 4. So what is that percentage wise? Less than 1. And you start to think, in 300 or 400 out of 15,000, what's the difference between 299 and 99 in quality of athlete? Because it doesn't happen. The first 300 go there and the next 100 go here. It doesn't happen that way. It's depending on the opinion of the scout at the time, and that can be very subjective. So 300 to 400, and I can give you thousands of names of guys that were projected really high, Johnny Manziel, and didn't make it. Just couldn't figure it out here and didn't make the team. So, you know, at the end of the day, 300 or 400 in 15,000. Then keep in mind that all the guys that don't get a chance that year, they want to try out again the second year, and there's a new crop of 15,000. So how much does that accumulate to the amount of quality athletes that could play pro football in either league that are sitting on the couch or training every day for their opportunity and not getting it? So when you're talking about talent and quality of play and world-class athletes, 2 leagues in the world, both world-class athletes.
100%. And you mentioned the examples of people that projected high don't do well. There's some people who are projected to not do well, and they do very well. Exactly. You look at some of the people that, again, if CBS comes knocking on your door tomorrow and says, "Hey, Glenn, we're going to give you 15 million next year to come do NFL games," you have, like, there's no real alternative. I don't think that your bank account would create a life of its own and strangle you if you didn't say yes.
Well, my wife might. But no, all kidding aside, I don't want to promote violence, but exactly. And I would do the exact same thing. I would prepare the same way. I would have passion for NFL football because it's football, and I've always loved it. I was a Steelers fan with Lynn Swann and Bradshaw and those guys back in the day. So, I grew up thinking Ronnie Lott was one of the safeties when I was in college that I watched play, but so was Nelson Martin, who played safety with the BC Lions. And I would study Ronnie Lott and I would study Nelson Martin and try to, bring my game along in the same vein, because they were guys that I looked up to and thought were awesome players. So yeah, I just, again, both guys world class, and somehow that gets missed in the messaging too much, because we that have been around football our whole lives and played it at the highest levels, we need to be explaining that better, because I think fans think it's sort of tier 1 and tier 2, and that's really not how it is. It just isn't. And again, I know there'll probably be people listening to this podcast right now saying, "Oh, come on, that's not true. If they're good enough, they're going to play there, and then if they don't make it there, they play here." That's not the case. I could take half of every roster, more than that, in every roster here, and you could interchange them. Really could.
And there's a lot of players too that just adjusting to the rules and the style of the game. It's different. You mentioned how the NFL has become more exciting. And I remember when chatting with Dwayne Ford, one of the key points he made to me was, you look at the late 90s and Mike McCoy being in the Calgary Stampeders, buried in the depth chart, ended up becoming an NFL head coach. Jeff Garcia, not really being seen as a person who was a reliable start in the NFL, goes to the CFL, does well, comes back, and then all of a sudden he's more of a household name. So the style of play, the way that the games change, John Hufnagel also being an underrated piece of how spread offense, right? 4 receiver sets, 5 receiver sets, things you never saw in the NFL. Everyone was under center, I formation. And now you see guys doing empty gun. You see Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson succeeding, people that would have been looked off 20 years ago in the NFL.
Absolutely. And I'll bring up another example of Ricky Williams. And Ricky Williams came up, different position now. So you're not in that quarterback spot, but he comes up. And there were many in Toronto, many respected writers who said that Ricky Williams may rush for 4,000 yards in Canada because he's that good. I mean, he was leading rusher in the NFL when he came up. And he plays for Toronto. He played in 16 games, I think. He had around 800 yards, or might have even been less than that, around 600 yards. And was okay. He was the good player that he was, and he was an outstanding football player, don't get me wrong, but they tackle, and they're grown men putting food on the table in our league as well. There's great defenders that'll get there in a hurry. He had to learn the nuances of the game as well, which is a little different, and your yard off the ball and the timing is different and all of those things. And then he went back to the NFL and rushed for over 1,500. So again, to suggest that just because he played there, he's going to come to Canada and dominate and rush for 4,000 yards, which is just silly. It just, again, we're missing in the in the messaging, and explaining to people just how great the athlete is that you're watching in BC Place Stadium or at BMO or wherever you're watching CFL football, because they are great football players and great athletes, most of which could play in either league.
100%. There, again, I agree wholeheartedly because it shows, and people who are stats wizards will try to correlate the probability, and it doesn't make sense because you can't just look at the numbers or try to pinpoint things based off one case. You have to understand that they are world-class athletes in both leagues, and the games being different doesn't make one better than the other. And it doesn't mean that one is tier one and the other is tier two. And you just got to appreciate them both for what they are. And that's the beauty of the game, is that they're different and they're both amazing.
Different, but not better or worse. And that's where you can stop your friends, your buddies, when they're talking about it, and just say, whoa, not better or worse, just different. And then suggest, maybe, why don't you come with me to a game down in BMO, and we'll just break it down and take a look. And you never know, you might get one of those 42-37 thrillers that the CFL can give you. And all of a sudden, I think when you're talking about the 27-year-old or 28, 30-year-old, that's going to be a harder sell. They are sort of set in their ways. And if they love the NFL, that's fine. No problem. I still don't know why they can't love both, but we'll just leave it at that. And then I think now we talk to the 8 and 9-year-old playing flag football and say, come and watch our game. If you love it, stay. If you don't, no problem. Then you can watch other leagues. But that's where I think we rebuild. And that's why I hope that the Players Association and the CFL come together with a longer term deal, like a 10-year deal, if possible. I hope that we can go back to the grassroots of it, the 8 and 9, 10-year-olds that are playing, guys and girls, and have them come to our game, have them meet our athletes, have them witness our athletes in that great world-class level that they play at, and that they're your own, that they're your neighbors, they're guys that live on the same street as you. And then maybe we'll see a little twinkle in some of those eyes of the 8 and 9-year-olds saying, maybe one day I could do this. Because that was me at one point when I was growing up in Prince George, and then went to Vancouver, and then played my amateur football from the very beginning up there. I thought, could I ever be a BC Lion or a Saskatchewan Roughrider? Could I ever make it? And some will say right now, especially in Toronto, some will say, you know what? I think young kids now are wondering, well, can I be a Pittsburgh Steeler, or can I be a Miami Dolphin, especially in the East? And I would say to that, it's the same thing. It's the same dream. So why would we devalue part of it? Why would we devalue the same dream? Because whether it's, as we've talked about, whether it's Pittsburgh or Toronto, the Toronto Argonauts, you're playing pro football, you're making a living at the highest level in the world. Those are the only two leagues in the world. I mean, they're not the only two leagues, but they're only two real leagues. The only two leagues that have lasted the test of time. Over 100 years for us, and I don't know, where are we in Super Bowls over there? 67 was the first one. So
exactly. And it shows again, like you got to watch and you got to believe that the athletes are both phenomenal, and the games being different doesn't make one necessarily better than the other.
Yeah. I can't wait for the season. I think we're going to have some great storylines here. I mean, you look in BC, and if Nathan Rourke can excel and become maybe our first in a long time Canadian real like starter that has the keys to the car. I mean, a guy who's going to be the guy that they go with all season kind of thing. If Nathan Rourke can be that with Michael O'Connor behind him, two Canadians in that position, I think that's a tremendous storyline. And how many young quarterbacks playing right now would look at that and go, could I be a BC Lion? Is that possible for me? And the power of that vision, the power of that dream, boy, that can change a kid's life. So that and so many other storylines are going to be outstanding this year. And I can't wait to kick it off and to kick off a real season, not a truncated season after coming off a missed season. You know, I know there's been a lot of people talk about the scoring is slightly down, and it's down by just under a field goal, I think. And that's fine. But if you miss a whole season and then don't have really a full training camp or preseason going into a half a season or a shortened season, that's where it hits you the hardest is offense, because offense requires reps and timing and spacing. And if you don't have that, and you don't have the time to work with your receivers as a quarterback and all that, you're going to feel it when you get into games. The timing won't be there. It'll take time. So I'm really looking forward this year for the guys to have a full camp, full preseason, and watch the offenses bounce back. There's a prediction for you. The offenses will bounce back. Now, I'm not talking about 45-40 every game, but the offenses will have a bounce back season.
And even when I ran the numbers, one of our school assignments was to do a debate or to argue an opinion. And the one that I chose was, people think the CFL needs to change to 4 downs because to increase scoring. When you look at the numbers before this season, the CFL had outscored the NFL for the last 5 years. So,
well, it's beyond that. It's beyond that. In fact, I have, somewhere here.
That was at least the research I did. I didn't go back farther than 5 years. You go back, yeah. I'm sure that it's been that way for a long time.
Yeah, the NFL in the 20 years leading up to 2019. So before the pandemic, when we missed the season in 2020 and they continued to play, right? So they played through that, and they played through it for 1 year without fans in the stands. Again, fans in the stands for the visiting team's offense can be very disruptive. So without those fans, their scoring was up slightly, but in the 20 years before 2019, never, not 1 year did the NFL outscore the Canadian Football League. Not 1 year. And some will say, well, yeah, but the CFL is trending this way and the NFL is trending that way. If you go back and look at the graph over that last 20 years, you will see upward movement for 2 or 3 years, then down for a couple of years, then up and then down. It's sort of like that in both leagues. And probably the reason for that, if you went back and looked at who was playing quarterback in those seasons, you would probably see when it drops, they're younger. And when it gets, goes up and scoring is growing and become, higher scored games, it's probably because the quarterbacks across the board are more veteran guys. So I would say that would be probably a reason to look at it and probably a trend. But I haven't done that math, so that's just a guess. But what is not a guess is that for 20 years going back, from 19 back 20, the NFL has not outscored us one season, not one. So I'm not sure that anything's broken in the Canadian Football League. Again, I say it over and over. We're not broken. It is not broken. In fact, we are leading when it comes to rule changes, because the CFL will make small tweaks in their rules that the NFL picks up and will do 2 years later. So, yeah, we're in a leadership position. The game is not broken, not even close. And by the way, I'll ask you this: how much more do we want in scoring? I mean, how high do we want these games to be? Like, do we want 50 games? Is that what is that the goal or the target? Are we looking at 70 games? Like, at what point are we going to just say, let's take the defenses off and see if they'll just drop the ball on their own? I mean, I love watching a great defensive game too. So if you love football, you want drama. You want down to the wire drama. And sometimes that means a low scoring game, but it still provides the great drama. And I'll tell you what, I love to see a corner shut down a wide out. I love to see a great defensive end get pressure, relentless pressure, or big nose tackle getting a great push every single snap. So yeah, I'm not sure why we have all of a sudden decided that higher scoring means more exciting. I'm not sure that's the case.
I don't think the ratings for the Arena Football League outpace the NFL or CFL.
Great point. Exactly. I just, and people will say that to me as a broadcaster. They'll say, what, are you ever cheering for Saskatchewan because you played there, or do you cheer for one team or the other depending on their circumstance? And I'll always say the same answer, which is absolutely not. I only cheer for a dramatic finish. If we go into the fourth quarter of a game, one possession, so meaning the score is within 7 points, or actually 8 points, because you can still score 8 points in one possession. 8 points or less going into the fourth quarter, that to me as a broadcaster is a good game. That's what I cheer for. I cheer for a one possession game into the fourth and drama down to the wire. And that could be 9-7 or that could be 29-27. It doesn't matter to me really how we got there. It's just that the drama is there, the game is on the line, and this play matters big time. That's what
100%. And this last Grey Cup had that all. Maybe the Grey Cup before that didn't, but it's still all exciting nonetheless. And I'm really looking forward to this season, especially like you said, full training camp, full preseason, full games, and a full slate of playoff, everything. It's going to be really exciting. And especially with the draft coming up here in just under 2 weeks' time. And again, the Fords on the board, the Philpotts on the board. The history of the CFL continues through the Philpotts with their father having played running back for BC and Winnipeg. Yeah. And Trey Ford could be that third guy that comes up and makes kids wonder, who are Canadian quarterbacks that haven't wondered this for a long, long time. Could I be a BC Lion? Could I be a Toronto Argonaut? It's going to be a great question to be posed. And I'm excited to look forward to the answer in a few weeks' time.
Yeah, I am too. I can't wait to kick it off and get to training camp, see how these young kids do. And I would suggest to them, whether they're drafted early or not drafted at all, get yourself in a training camp any way you can, and then go and do your thing. And don't look at it and think, well, I didn't get drafted, or I didn't get drafted in one of the top 2 or 3 rounds, so therefore I probably won't make it. That's not how it works. You get into training camp, you be the hardest working guy in the room, be willing to sacrifice and be willing to do whatever's asked of you, because that's what football demands, and then do your thing, and then let the chips fall after that. That would be my advice for all these draft picks and all these young kids. And I know there's going to be more of a microscope on a guy like Nathan Rourke in Vancouver because he is Canadian, but he'll be fine with that. And I think, he will be, let's put it, waving the flag while he goes to work. That flag will always be close to him.
Glenn, we're getting towards the end of our time on today's episode. So I want to ask you a few fun wrap-up questions before we part for today.
Sure.
During your CFL career, who was the best receiver that you had to guard?
Alan Pitts. Yeah, I would say Alan Pitts would probably be the toughest. I remember one time in Calgary, Richie Hall and I, who was the halfback on the side that Alan Pitts was playing in that particular play. We were on probably our own 20-yard line, and Alan Pitts for Calgary broke the huddle. Flutie was his quarterback. And I looked at Richie and I said, he's going to run a corner and they're going to throw it to Pitts. And Richie said, oh yeah, that's exactly the route that we're going to run. Pitts is running a corner here. And I went, okay, so let's double team him. We both agreed, and he caught the ball in the corner for a touchdown, because even though we were both draped all over him, somehow he figured out a way to catch it. But there was some great one. Brian Kelly was a great one. Tom Scott in Edmonton. I remember how tough it was to cover Ray Elgard in practice. I mean, he was just a beast, swatting people out of the way like they were nothing. And, so there's a lot of great ones, but I would put Alan Pitts right up there.
Now to flip to your own team, who is the toughest receiver to guard in practice, or toughest two, I should say, because you guys had a lot of good ones.
Yeah, I would say it was Ray Elgard. I mean, Fairholm had great speed, but speed wasn't, I wasn't a real fast guy as a DB, but speed was easier to cover to me. It had more tells. So a guy breaks off the line and he hits that downhill motion that we have in the Canadian Football League, and he gets that good running start. It was easier for me to tell if a guy was just a speed guy going to try and run by you. And then you just turn early enough and you're okay. The tougher guy was the route runner, and Ray was so tough because he was a route runner, but also physical. So, you could be sitting on a route with him, like a corner route or a curl, and he would just swat you or give you a forearm and get that separation that he needed subtly so he wasn't drawing a penalty, and then he'd catch the ball in front of you. And it was quite frustrating to try and cover Ray. So I'd put him number one.
Your opinion, besides your 89 championship team, who do you think was the best team that you guys ever played against in your entire career?
Well, Flutie's Calgary Stampeders, when I was playing, was really tough. I always looked forward to the competition of playing against a Matt Dunnigan-led team. Matt was just so aggressive and physical at the quarterback position. I always joked that there was, we would always bang heads, and he would always try to plant a seed in my head. In warm up, he'd walk over to me and he goes, you never go wrong when you go long. You never go wrong when you go long, Glenn. And he would plant that seed because he would think he'd want me to back up a step or two so I wouldn't get beat deep in the game, and that would open up underneath stuff for him. So he was always messing me, but he always was physical, and we rammed heads a few times, or had those collisions. And I always joked that there was one time I held Matt Dunnigan to a 2-yard gain, and the problem was we were on our own 1-yard line. So he was tough to play against, but I would say that the toughest would have been Doug Flutie. And I know as a defensive unit that year, and the years that Flutie was in the league, we were game planning at the beginning of the season before it started in the preseason. Like every week you game plan for the team you're playing. But before that, we would be figuring out schemes to beat Doug Flutie and the Calgary Stampeders. That's how we went into season, saying if we want to get there, we're going to have to go through Calgary. We're going to have to beat Doug Flutie. So when you think about that and have that kind of respect, yeah, I would say that would probably be the answer.
Who is the biggest jokester on your team?
Well, I might have to take that crown because I constantly messed with the offensive linemen. I used to just torture them, and I used to sneak in behind them, and when they were doing their breakdown, and I used to just put my hand in there quietly, and they wouldn't even notice me. And then I go, "Hey, fat guys," and I joke around. Now I know that's politically incorrect to say, so now it'd be, "Hey, big bone guys," or whatever. But the torment that I would subject the O-line to, I think, yeah, that was always fun. And I've always said that I have 1,000 stories about it, but I've always said that, the O-line you can torment and bug and make fun of because they're not going to chase you, really. I mean, all you have to do is be out of their reach when you do it, because they're not going to really move far to go get you. Crucial to winning and losing football games. But man, did I have fun with them.
Who would you say was the most intimidating teammate that you had?
Eddie Lowe. Yeah. Eddie Lowe, I've always talked about, as a broadcaster too, when I see guys that do a lot of talking, guys that think that the trash talk is toughness. And I kind of laugh at it. I mean, I'm not saying if that's your style that it's wrong, because do what you do you, that's important. And if you're a trash talker, be a trash talker. But if you want to see a guy that's intimidating, it's the guy that has the assassin look but doesn't say anything. That's the guy you worry about. And Eddie Lowe, who is now, I believe he is in politics in Alabama, this guy was, he'd come back to the huddle and he'd mention, "I'm going after that quarterback." And I thought, this could be ugly collision, because this guy is jacked up. And and he didn't trash talk. In fact, he was almost shy, but shy and focused and have the look of, I am going to knock you into next week. That was Eddie Lowe. That's intimidating to me. That's tough to me. Getting up and playing hard the next play, even when you get knocked down, playing hard the next play and playing physical the next play. That's tough. Getting up and yapping and drawing a penalty and doing all that, not tough, just showboating. Again, if you're a trash talker, be a trash talker. That's cool. That's your thing. No problem. But I'm reluctant to put that into the category of intimidation or toughness because I'm not sure that it is.
What would you say, in terms of your broadcasting career, was the craziest play or moment in a game that still sticks out to you to this day?
Yeah, it's the '09 game. You know, that championship where a field goal was missed, the Riders thought they'd won, and then it was reset and kicked again with no time on the clock, and they came back and kicked it again, and that game was outstanding, top to bottom. But that moment, I think, as a broadcaster, will be the one that will always sort of stick with me. And part of it is self-evaluation, because I look at that moment and I think I really didn't handle that as well as I would have liked to. It's kind of like I don't want to do over, because I wouldn't see that happen. I don't want to see that happen to any other team ever. But I was trying to find the right words to sort of surmise what I was looking at, and I just couldn't. It was almost emotional. It was almost emotional for me as a former athlete, going, what would I be feeling right now? That, you know, that just, I can't, it's just ripping the championship right out of your hands a minute later. I don't know how to describe what that could feel like. I'm not sure anybody can, except for those that were involved. So I think that one stands out more than any.
I was going to say, maybe for a regular season game, would you have to put Milt Steagle's 100-yard catch up there for craziest endings?
Well, I thought it was one of Cuthbert's great calls. And I just, you know, I reluctant to give Milt Steagle too much credit for anything, because he'll take that and he'll put it in his back pocket, and then he probably will roll it as a like a phone tone or something like that, you know. But I didn't face Steagle, but I know that Steagle was again, he was like the Alan Pitts guy, a different style of receiver, a lot more speed than Alan did, but again, just could do it all, like G. Roy Simon, Milt Steagle, Brian Kelly, guys that were tremendous route runners, speed to burn, and could catch it anywhere. And Tony Champion, as we talked a while ago. But yeah, I don't want to give Milt too much credit, or else Milt he'll take that ball and run with it.
I heard one of his former teammates, Brett McNeil, told me that he never saw Milt Steagle get caught from behind, and I'm not sure if there are many other guys in the CFL who are like that amongst the ones you named.
Yeah, he's probably right, but now you've got me intrigued to see if I can find the time. And I might have to go back into the edit suite and just go over every one of Milt's games till I find somewhere someone tracked him down from behind and then roll that into one of our telecasts. Oh man, no, great guy, and boy, has he become a great broadcaster too. But there's just a tremendous Hall of Fame receiver.
Final question for you is this: what is your favorite football movie of all time?
I love the speech in Any Given Sunday with Pacino basically talking about the guy beside you in the locker room and scratching for that inch. And, I'm not sure that the movie was my favorite, but I love that speech because moments in there really was kind of what happened in '89. We just decided to play for each other and brought it together that way. And, when he says, I think if you look to the guy beside you, you'll see a guy that will go that inch with you. That is brilliant. That is exactly what football is. That's what team time is. And so I'm always drawn to that. I actually recorded it and I listened over and over to it. And I know it's Hollywood and I know it's Al Pacino and all that, but that part of that speech, that's what the game's about. The game is about coming together as a group, playing for the guy beside you or girl, and having a common goal. And you're willing to do anything you have to do to get there, even if you think different politically or religiously or have different color skin. It doesn't matter. Put it all on the shelf for a second, because we're here for each other. That's what football is. That's why I love it. And that was in that speech.
Glenn, I want to thank you so much for having been on today's episode. It was tremendous being able to chat about Canadian football with you. And I just know that when the enthusiasm oozes like you have for Canadian football, it's always bound to be a great time. And we chatted about so many great things today. And it was honestly just a pleasure. And I'm glad we're able to connect and to uplift the great game that is Canadian football.
Love it. Anytime. I'm here for it and love talking CFL football.
And thank you to the listener for enjoying today's episode of CFL on TSN analyst Glen Suitor.